Liberty University dismissed a male employee hired to work at their IT help desk after he notified the university that he now identifies as a transgender woman and plans to change his name to Eleanor Zinsky. Now, this week, the ACLU of Virginia and a Virginia law firm filed a lawsuit on behalf of Zinsky, claiming the university violated Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The lawsuit seeks compensation and punitive damages on behalf of Zinsky, as well as a declaratory relief that Liberty University's policy violates Title VII. Now, this looks like a setup to me because of the court's decision in Bostock, which came in June of 2020, which was it was actually a couple of cases combined into one. One was a nursing home. A funeral home in which a male employee changed over to female, and of course it made people uncomfortable, and the employer said, look, can't do this, was not how we hired you. Well, the court ruled against that funeral home in that case, but we're now talking about religious institutions. Will religious institutions be forced to violate their authentically held, biblically based beliefs? Joining me now to discuss this is First Liberty Institute Senior Counsel Stephanie Taub. Stephanie, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on to talk about this very important issue.
Well, it's extremely important because this will have an effect on religious institutions across the country. Liberty University has a doctrinal statement that names denial of birth sex by self-identification with a different gender as a sinful act prohibited by God. Now, how does federal law address religious organizations and their beliefs? Do they have to sacrifice their religious convictions on the altar of political correctness?
They absolutely should not be forced to do that. And fortunately, the law gives a couple of very strong lines of defense for religious organizations. The first one is in the Constitution. And fortunately, we've had a couple of very good decisions from the United States Supreme Court that protects religious schools and their right to hire so-called ministers or people that are responsible for teaching the faith to the next generation as a part of their religious school. And there's also protections in federal employment discrimination law itself, which gives protections for religious employers to make employment decisions based on religion. But what we see here is we see radical organizations like the ACLU that are trying to chip away at the right of religious schools, and especially Christian schools, and their right to actually remain a community of faith that are dedicated to their doctrinal principles.
So let me ask you this, Stephanie. So in previous court cases, certain positions were recognized as being held to, like ministers and those that, as you mentioned, teachers and others. But when you're creating a community and you're trying to create a community based upon biblical truth, anyone that you'd allow in there to do something that was 180 degrees removed from that teaching could be problematic for the entire institution, could it not?
Absolutely. And what makes a Christian school is its ability to have Christians who adhere to the same doctrinal statements, who are able to work together in a community to achieve a shared mission. And what you have here with these kinds of lawsuits is the ACLU trying to force Christian schools to accept and maintain employees who are acting out of step with those doctrinal statements, who are contradicting them, and this has the potential to interfere with the religious schools and their ability to effectively fulfill their religious missions.
So, Stephanie, what if my suspicions are correct, that you had an individual that was kind of put up to this and went in one way, and then once they got on the inside said, hey, I'm not really a man, I'm identifying as a woman. I mean, isn't there some type of protection against institutions for those that are trying to set them up and do this surreptitiously?
Well, if it is disingenuous, that's certainly a defense that I would imagine would be raised. And I think institutions like Liberty University require all of their employees to sincerely sign the doctrinal statement or agree to
Right.
it. And if it was not agreed to in good faith, that would certainly be a very good defense for this organization.
Our Lady of Guadalupe School was a court case that actually kind of broadened the areas that are protected by religious positions rather, that are protected. I think the left's a little bit concerned by that. You also add to that RFRA protections, I think, apply as well. So I would think that Liberty has a pretty good foundation from which to argue that their position is reasonable.
Yes, I would think so. But I think that some of these issues, especially the interpretation of the statutory protections, are ones that the Supreme Court is going to need to clarify in the not too distant future. So we've seen very good cases protecting religious schools and teachers at those religious schools in the Our Lady of Guadalupe case. But some of these cases, we've seen courts go the wrong way and not protect religious organizations, especially when it comes to the statutory rights of these schools. So we'll be keeping an eye out for those at First Liberty, and I know there's a lot of good organizations that are doing work in this area. Fighting to protect religious liberty for these schools is just so important in the face of these increasing attacks.
So these court cases that we're up against a break, but these court decisions like Bostock creates a whole new area of conflict within federal law. And then it's going to eventually, it has to come back to the court for them to clarify and address those issues that they created by their own decision, right?
Yes, absolutely. So that's one problem when courts are expanding what a civil rights legislation that was passed in 1964 actually means, and suddenly it means something totally different. And so
Right.
there's created a lot of open questions, especially when it comes to the intersection of the Bostock decision and religious liberty. So we're continuing to see those pop up, and we're continuing to fight for religious liberty.
Well, we appreciate all that you do at First Liberty Institute. Stephanie, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.